Disrespect rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive as an argument or an obvious insult. Most of the time, it slips in quietly, almost politely, wrapped in familiarity. A comment said with a half smile, a joke that lingers a second too long, a tone that subtly lowers your position without ever raising its voice. And because nothing openly hostile happened, your mind hesitates. You wonder if you imagined it. You tell yourself not to overreact. You decide to let it go, but your body does not hesitate. It responds immediately. A tightening in the chest, a shallow breath, a sudden urge to speak quickly, to clarify, to soften the moment so it doesn't hang in the air. This reaction matters more than the words themselves. Before judgment forms, before logic steps in, your nervous system has already registered that something crossed an invisible line. The Stoics paid close attention to this moment. They understood that the first disturbance is not yet a thought, but a signal. What makes this moment dangerous is not the comment itself, but what usually happens next. Silence feels uncomfortable. Tension feels unsafe. So, most people move quickly to erase the discomfort. They explain what they meant. They laugh to show they're easygoing. They rush to prove they're reasonable and unbothered. On the surface, this looks calm and mature. Inside, it feels like relief. The moment passes, the room relaxes. But something important was left unnamed. This is how disrespect learns where it can stay. Not through force, but through ambiguity. The other person does not need to decide to disrespect you. They only need to notice that nothing stopped them. Human behavior adapts quietly. What meets no resistance becomes familiar. What costs nothing becomes repeatable. If a small jab is absorbed, it becomes easier to try again. If a dismissive tone creates no consequence, it quietly settles into the relationship. Over time, these moments stack. You may not remember each one clearly, but your body does. You start anticipating them before they happen. You prepare to smooth things over in advance. You become quicker at absorbing discomfort so the interaction can stay pleasant. And slowly, without any open conflict, a pattern forms where your emotional energy becomes the buffer. This is why disrespect so often feels confusing. There is no single incident to confront, no dramatic scene to point to. Just a growing sense that certain conversations leave you smaller, quieter, less grounded than you were before. The Stoic insight here is not about blaming the other person. It is about noticing how your own reactions may be training the environment around you. Before we go deeper, take a moment to support this channel if this resonates with you. If you value calm strength, emotional clarity, and Stoic wisdom applied to real life, like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Stoic Path. This channel exists to help you protect your inner peace quietly, consistently, without drama. Now, here is where the real shift begins. Because once you see how disrespect starts, the next question is unavoidable. Why does it keep coming back? Why do certain people repeat the same behavior while others never cross the line at all? To understand that, we need to look at the invisible conditioning underneath these moments. And that is where the Stoic lens becomes truly powerful. If you pay close attention, you will notice something subtle in these moments. The discomfort does not come only from what was said. It comes from the speed at which you felt compelled to respond. The pressure to move, to adjust, to restore balance as quickly as possible. This pressure is not imposed from the outside. It rises from within. And once you recognize it, you begin to see the pattern more clearly. Disrespect survives on urgency. It depends on your impulse to fix what feels off before it has time to settle. The faster you react, the more information you give away. Not through words, but through energy. Your pace reveals your priorities. Your haste signals availability. and availability, when it is unexamined, becomes an invitation. This is why so many people feel confused when they try to address disrespect directly. They speak up once, maybe even firmly, but nothing truly changes. The tone returns. The jokes come back. The same dynamic reappears in a different form. The issue was never a lack of courage or clarity. It was timing. It was speed. It was the invisible habit of reacting before choosing. Stoic practice begins exactly here, not with what you say, but with what you interrupt. The interruption of automatic movement. The pause between impression and response. This pause is small, but it is decisive. It is where choice replaces reflex. And without this pause, no boundary can hold for long, because it will always be delivered from the same reactive place. So before we talk about what to say or when to remain silent, we need to understand why certain behaviors repeat while others disappear. Why some people seem to test you again and again, while others never try at all. The answer is not hidden in their personalities. It is hidden in the patterns that have been quietly reinforced over time. And that brings us to the next layer of this conversation. Because once you understand how disrespect begins, the more important question emerges naturally. Why does it keep repeating, even when you believe you are handling it calmly? The repetition is not random, it is not bad luck, and it is rarely about someone suddenly deciding to treat you poorly. Disrespect returns because it has learned that it can. Not consciously, not always deliberately, but reliably. Human behavior is shaped less by intention and more by outcome. We repeat what works. We abandon what doesn't. This applies to kindness as much as it applies to subtle domination. When a behavior produces a result, attention, control of the mood, a shift in the room, it leaves an imprint. The mind remembers it, even if the person could not explain why. Over time, that imprint becomes habit. This is where most people misread the situation. They assume disrespect comes from confidence or strength on the other side. But what actually fuels it is reinforcement. When a small jab is met with explanation, it teaches the other person that your clarity is flexible. When a dismissive tone is absorbed to keep things smooth, it teaches them that the cost is low. When you rush to repair the moment so no one feels awkward, you show that you will carry the emotional weight. None of this requires cruelty. It only requires repetition. The Stoics were precise about this distinction. Epictetus reminded his students that what disturbs us is not events themselves, but our judgments and responses to them. When your response consistently softens or compensates for another person's behavior, the pattern becomes stable, not because they are winning, but because the system has found equilibrium with you absorbing the imbalance. This is why asking, "How do I make them respect me?" rarely leads anywhere useful. That question places the source of control outside of you. It turns respect into something you must earn, negotiate, or perform. Stoic logic reframes the issue completely. The real question is, what kind of access has my reaction been providing? Access to your emotional energy, access to your attention, access to your urgency to be understood. When these are freely available, behavior adjusts to use them. When they are limited, behavior changes or loses interest. Over time, this conditioning becomes subtle. You may not notice yourself giving access anymore. It feels normal. You become efficient at smoothing tension. You anticipate misunderstandings before they happen. You manage your tone, your words, your posture, all to prevent discomfort. And because this effort is quiet, it often goes unrecognized even by you. This is where the cost deepens. The more you manage the interaction, the less space there is for your own presence. You are not fully choosing your responses anymore. You are reacting to a pattern that has already been set in motion. And once reaction becomes automatic, power quietly leaves the room. The Stoic insight here is not to blame yourself, but to reclaim timing. Conditioning only works when responses are predictable. The moment predictability is interrupted, the pattern begins to weaken. When you slow down, when you remove urgency, when you stop offering immediate access to your inner world, the behavior has nothing to lean on. This is why calm is so disruptive. Not because it intimidates, but because it removes reinforcement. Disrespect expects movement. It expects adjustment. It expects you to change shape around it. When you don't, the behavior meets silence instead of fuel. And without fuel, it cannot sustain itself. Understanding this is the turning point, because now the goal is no longer to fix the other person. The goal is to interrupt the conditioning that made the pattern possible. And once you see that, a deeper question emerges, one that Stoicism insists we face honestly. What has this pattern been costing you over time, beneath the surface, where no one else can see it? When a pattern repeats long enough, it stops feeling like a problem and starts feeling like reality. This is where the true cost of disrespect becomes difficult to see, not because it is small, but because it is familiar. You are no longer reacting to a single moment. You are living inside an adjustment that has slowly become automatic. The most immediate cost is energy. Every time you anticipate a comment, manage a tone, or soften a boundary before it is crossed, you are spending attention that could have been directed elsewhere. This does not show up as exhaustion all at once. It shows up as a dull heaviness after certain conversations, a sense that you need time alone to recover, even though nothing bad happened. This is the body signaling that it has been working without your conscious consent. There is also a cognitive cost. When you repeatedly tolerate small intrusions, your mind learns to stay slightly alert. You replay conversations. You edit future responses in advance. You think about what you should have said, or what you will say next time. This mental noise erodes clarity. It fragments presence. You are no longer fully engaged with what is in front of you, because part of your attention is always guarding against what might come. Over time, this constant adjustment reshapes self-perception. You may begin to see yourself as someone who has to be careful, diplomatic, flexible. These traits are often praised, but when they are born from avoidance rather than choice, they hollow out confidence. You are no longer acting from your center. You are adapting to preserve comfort. And adaptation, when it becomes habitual, quietly replaces self-command. The Stoics warned about this internal drift long before modern psychology gave it language. They observed that when a person repeatedly yields their inner state to external behavior, they lose something more valuable than approval. They lose coherence. Their actions no longer arise from a unified sense of what matters. Instead, they arise from anticipation and correction. This is not peace. It is management. Perhaps the most painful cost is subtle resentment, not always toward the other person, but toward yourself. A quiet disappointment that you did not protect your own boundary when it mattered. This resentment does not erupt. It settles. It turns into self-doubt. It whispers that you should have been stronger, clearer, faster, and because it has no clear target, it lingers. This is why unresolved disrespect often feels heavier than open conflict. A conflict ends. It resolves or it breaks. But a tolerated pattern continues to demand attention without offering resolution. It occupies space in the mind and body long after the interaction is over, and the longer it continues, the more it distorts your sense of what is normal. Stoic wisdom does not frame this as failure. It frames it as information. If a situation repeatedly diminishes your presence, it is not neutral. If an interaction requires you to shrink to function, it is not balanced. Recognizing this is not about becoming rigid or confrontational. It is about restoring accuracy. And this realization naturally leads to the next question. If the cost of tolerating disrespect is so high, why do we continue to pay it? The answer lies not in weakness, but in a misunderstanding of where power actually lives. And that is where Stoic logic begins to offer a different path forward. The Stoic shift begins when you stop asking how to manage other people and start examining how you manage access to yourself. This is not a semantic change. It is a structural one. As long as your attention is fixed on adjusting someone else's behavior, your inner state remains reactive. But the moment your focus returns inward to pace, to participation, to choice, the balance of power changes quietly and immediately. Stoicism does not deny emotion. It denies compulsion. The feeling that you must respond, must clarify, must smooth the moment before it settles. This feeling is often mistaken for maturity, but in truth, it is urgency wearing a polite mask. And urgency is rarely a sign of authority. Authority moves slowly because it does not fear silence. It does not fear misunderstanding. It does not fear a pause. This is why calm is so disruptive to disrespect. Calm refuses to reorganize itself around provocation. It does not rush to correct a tone or repair an awkwardness it did not create. It allows the moment to exist without feeding it. In doing so, it withdraws access not as punishment, but as consequence. The behavior no longer receives the attention or emotional energy it depended on. Power dynamics operate on rhythm. The person who controls the pace controls the interaction. When you react instantly, the pace belongs to the other person. When you slow down, the rhythm shifts. A pause appears where there was supposed to be pursuit. A silence opens where there was supposed to be explanation. This silence is not empty. It is full of choice. And choice is what re-establishes inner authority. Many people worry that this approach will feel cold or distant, but Stoic calm is not detachment from others. It is attachment to clarity. You are not withdrawing because you are afraid. You are remaining steady because you are no longer willing to leak energy into patterns that diminish you. There is a difference. One collapses inward, the other stands still. This is also why Stoic boundaries do not rely on emotion to be effective. Anger can momentarily stop behavior, but it creates a new pattern of volatility. Explanation can invite understanding, but it also invites negotiation. Calm, by contrast, communicates finality without aggression. It signals that your standards are not a reaction, they are a position. When access is limited, people adjust. Not always in the way you expect. Some soften their tone. Some grow more careful. Some lose interest altogether. Stoicism does not judge these outcomes. It reads them as information. If someone can only engage with you when you are emotionally available for imbalance, distance is not a punishment. It is alignment. This is the deeper reason Stoicism emphasizes self-command over self-expression. Expression without command dissipates. Command without expression stabilizes. When your inner state is no longer contingent on the behavior of others, you become difficult to pull off center. And when you are difficult to pull off center, disrespect loses its leverage. This brings us to the practical moment where philosophy becomes action, because controlling access is not an abstract idea. It shows up in timing, in restraint, in the willingness to say less, not more. And sometimes it shows up in a single sentence delivered once, without explanation, that makes your position unmistakably clear. That sentence is not a weapon. It is a line drawn quietly from a place that no longer negotiates its own worth. And understanding how to use it, when to speak it, and when to let silence do the work, is the next step in translating Stoic logic into lived strength. Once you understand that disrespect feeds on access, the role of language becomes very clear. Words are no longer tools to convince, explain, or correct. They become markers of participation. Sometimes you speak to open a door. Sometimes you speak to close one. And in moments of disrespect, fewer words create more clarity. This is where the Stoic boundary takes its simplest and most powerful form. One sentence, said once, calmly, without decoration. I don't accept being spoken to like that. Nothing in this sentence is accidental. It works not because it is sharp, but because it is precise. It does not accuse. It does not interpret. It does not demand agreement. It names a decision, and decisions do not argue. It places ownership where it belongs. You are not diagnosing the other person's character. You are not labeling them rude, immature, or disrespectful. You are speaking only about what you allow. Stoicism avoids personal attacks because they escalate emotion and invite defense. This sentence does neither. Don't accept is not a feeling. It is not, I'm uncomfortable, or I don't like that. Those phrases invite negotiation. They ask the other person to consider your internal state. Acceptance, by contrast, is a boundary of participation. It communicates finality without threat. It says this line exists, whether or not you approve of it. Being spoken to like that targets behavior, not identity. You are not defining who they are. You are defining what just happened. This keeps the boundary clean. Clean boundaries are difficult to argue with because they offer no hook. If someone pushes back, they reveal more about themselves than about you. Delivery matters more than volume. Say it slowly. Neutral expression, relaxed shoulders, no smile, no anger, no apology. Your body should look as though the sentence is obvious, not emotional. The power of this boundary comes from congruence. When your tone, posture, and timing align, the message lands without force. Timing is critical. The sentence must come immediately after the disrespect, not hours later in a message, not buried inside a longer explanation. Immediate boundaries train faster because they connect cause and effect. They do not allow the moment to blur. They do not invite reinterpretation. And then comes the part most people struggle with. You stop talking. The moment you add more, you weaken the line. When you explain why it bothered you, you invite evaluation. When you soften it with humor, you blur it. When you add please, you turn a standard into a request. Stoic boundaries are not requests. They are statements of participation. Silence after the sentence is not awkward by accident. It is functional. It forces reality to surface. The other person may joke. They may deflect. They may accuse you of being sensitive. These are not arguments. They are tests. They are attempts to regain access to the old version of you, the one who repaired discomfort by sacrificing clarity. Do not chase the repair. Let the pause exist. Discomfort is not damage. It is information. It tells you that a pattern has been interrupted. And interruption is the goal. This sentence is not meant to be repeated frequently. Repetition turns clarity into performance. You do not perform your standards. You live them. Say it once when the line is real. Mean it. And then allow your behavior afterward to confirm that you were not negotiating. What happens next will reveal everything. Some people will adjust. Some will retreat. Some will test again. How you respond after the sentence matters as much as the sentence itself. Because this is where most people undo their own boundary, not with words, but with urgency. And that is exactly what we need to look at next. The sentence itself is simple. What follows it is not. The most dangerous moment is not when you speak the boundary, but the seconds that come after. This is where many people quietly undo their own clarity, not because they are weak, but because their nervous system is used to repairing tension. After you set a boundary, the room often changes. There may be silence, a shift in tone, an awkward pause that feels heavier than the original comment. Your body notices this immediately. The urge rises to smooth things over, to explain yourself, to show that you are still kind, still reasonable, still safe to be around. This urge feels moral. It feels mature. But it is the same impulse that trained the disrespect in the first place. Your nervous system has learned that tension equals danger, so it searches for relief. It suggests follow-up messages, softening phrases, justifications. I didn't mean it that way. You probably didn't intend it. I'm just stressed lately. Each of these moves shifts the boundary from a decision into a discussion. And once it becomes a discussion, it can be negotiated, minimized, or dismissed. This is where Stoic discipline becomes essential. Not discipline over others, but discipline over impulse. Seneca warned against becoming a servant to the opinions of others. The fastest path into that servitude is the need to repair every tension you did not create. When you rush to relieve discomfort that arose from someone else's behavior, you carry a burden that was never yours. Guilt often appears here, disguised as conscience. You may think you were too harsh, too cold, too direct. But clarity can feel harsh to people who were benefiting from your flexibility. This does not mean you acted wrongly. It means the dynamic has changed. Boundaries feel uncomfortable, not because they are wrong, but because they interrupt a familiar pattern. People may respond in predictable ways. Shock is common. So is humor used as retreat. I was just kidding. Or reversal. You're too sensitive. These are not responses to your boundary. They are probes, tests to see if the old access still exists. If you re-engage emotionally, the test passes. If you remain steady, the test fails. The Stoic response is restraint, not silence born of fear, but silence chosen with intention. You do not glare. You do not sigh. You do not withdraw dramatically. You simply allow the boundary to stand without reinforcement. This is harder than speaking, because it asks you to tolerate temporary discomfort without reaching for relief. Remember, the goal is not to punish, it is to reset. When you stop feeding the moment with explanation or reassurance, reality reorganizes itself. Either the person adjusts their behavior, or they reveal that they were only comfortable when you were flexible at your own expense. In either case, you gain clarity. This is the point where many people think they have lost something, a connection, a sense of ease, a version of themselves that felt accommodating. But what you have actually lost is a role, the role of emotional buffer, and losing that role creates space. What fills that space depends on what you do next. And that leads us to the final distinction we need to make. When is it right to speak a boundary, and when is silence the stronger response? Not every moment of disrespect requires a sentence, and not every boundary needs words to exist. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Stoic strength is silence. Many people confuse silence with avoidance, weakness, or fear, but Stoic silence is none of those things. It is choice. The key distinction is intention. Silence that comes from fear collapses inward. It tightens the body. It lowers the gaze. It leaks discomfort. People can feel it, and when they do, it invites further pressure. But silence that comes from clarity does the opposite. It is relaxed. It does not rush. It does not signal submission. It simply removes participation. Some people do not disrespect to dominate. They disrespect to provoke. They want reaction, not resolution. They feed on engagement itself, whether it is anger, explanation, or emotional response. In these moments, even a well-delivered boundary can become fuel. Words give them something to push against. Silence gives them nothing. Stoic disengagement is clean. You do not glare. You do not roll your eyes. You do not withdraw theatrically. You continue as if the bait never landed. Your body remains neutral. Your attention stays where it was. The message is not announced, but it is unmistakable. This does not reach me. This is where many people struggle. because silence feels unfinished. The mind wants closure. The nervous system wants relief. But Stoic practice teaches tolerance for incompleteness. Not every moment needs to resolve immediately. Some patterns end not with confrontation, but with irrelevance. Boundaries are for patterns. Silence is for noise. If someone crosses a line once, clarity may be useful. If they repeat the same behavior after you have been clear, repetition of the sentence weakens its power. Strength does not need rehearsal. At that point, the response is distance, fewer words, less access. Not as punishment, but as consequence. High self-respect does not announce itself. It is observed. It shows up in what you no longer explain, what you no longer chase, and what you no longer tolerate. When you stop reacting, you stop feeding the dynamic. And when the dynamic is no longer fed, it dissolves. This is the final Stoic shift. Respect was never about being liked. It was never about winning exchanges or correcting behavior. It was about clarity, about deciding quietly and consistently what kind of access others have to your inner world. When you control access, conversations slow down. People adjust. Some disappear. Others show up differently. None of this requires drama. It requires steadiness. And steadiness, practiced over time, becomes your reputation. And with that understanding, we arrive at the quiet conclusion of this path. Not a technique to use once, but a habit to live. One that protects your inner peace, not through force, but through discernment. What you have seen here is not a strategy to control people. It is a return to self-command. Disrespect does not lose its power because you defeated someone in conversation. It loses its power when it no longer reaches you, when your pace slows, when your reactions become choices, when your inner world is no longer open by default. Stoicism does not promise that everyone will treat you better. It promises something more reliable, that you will no longer betray your own clarity to keep the moment comfortable, that you will no longer rush to repair what you did not break, that you will recognize the difference between peace and quiet resignation. The sentence you learned is not a tool to carry everywhere. It is a line to use when it matters. And the silence that follows is not emptiness. It is space. Space where patterns either adjust or reveal themselves. Space where your energy returns to you instead of leaking outward. As you practice this, you may notice something subtle. Conversations change, not because you demand respect, but because you no longer offer unlimited access. Some people soften, some step back, some disappear. None of this needs to be forced. Alignment happens naturally when standards are lived instead of explained. Remember this one, Stoic thought as you move forward. I protect my peace by choosing what I allow. You do not need to announce this choice. You do not need to justify it. Let it show up in your timing, your restraint, and your consistency. Over time, this becomes who you are, not something you perform. If this reflection resonated with you, take a quiet moment to engage. You can leave a comment with the place where you need this most: work, family, or friendships. Not to explain, but to acknowledge. And if you want to continue walking this path of calm strength, emotional clarity, and Stoic wisdom applied to modern life, you are welcome to stay. This is Stoic Path. We do not chase control. We cultivate command, quietly, daily, without drama,